So I know some of y'all are probably like, let's not do this again, but some of y'all asked me last Sunday to explain this a little better about this timeline, different timeline for Jesus and the resurrection. So, and you know, I always grew up with this Catholic timeline. Friday night, you know, Good Friday, we always call it Good Friday, right? Friday that Jesus was crucified, and then we have, Saturday, then Resurrection Sunday, and that's, kind of how all of us have always heard it our whole lives, because that's kind of what Catholicism brought in, was kind of that idea. And it's kind of never worked for me because obviously I never could get 3 days and 3 nights out of that. And the argument has always been, my whole life, is that Jewish time goes sunrise to sunset. So if Jesus was in the tomb before sunset on Friday, try to go through this slow so I don't confuse myself. If he was in the tomb before sunset on Friday, Friday would be considered one day. Y'all with me so far, right? And then Friday night would have been a night, right? And then Saturday would have been a day. So they consider Friday as one day a night, then Saturday is one day and night. I'm trying to work this out, right? And then they said if he's out of the tomb after daybreak on Sunday, then technically in Jewish time, Sunday would be a day. So that gives us Friday, Saturday, Sunday on some sort of technicality, right? But then the dilemma of that is that any way you look at this situation, we've only got Friday night and Saturday night. Am I right? Are y'all following me on this, right? So that's always, when I was growing up, and that's what we always hear, and that's what we see, But you have to start asking yourself, is that right? Could that really be right? Is that how it was? Well, so, like I said, I've been through this before, but every time we kind of get to this, everybody goes, how did you say that? How does that work? So we're going to look at it again. We're going to look at it again, Jennifer. Here we go. So anyway, number one is the Sabbath day is a day of rest. But Sabbath was always Saturday, but not exclusively always Saturday. Does that make any sense? Sabbath was always Saturday in Judaism. That is the seventh day, Sabbath. But there were other Sabbaths in Judaism besides Saturday, because the Sabbath is a day of rest, a day you do no work, a day you don't do anything. There's other days in Judaism that are that, and one of those days is Passover. And this is Jesus' prophecy, right? He says, some of the scribes and Pharisees said to him, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. But he answered and said to them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, and yet no sign to be given to it but the sign of Jonah. As Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Now, if Jesus speaks truth, which we know Jesus speaks truth, then somehow we've got to have 3 days and 3 nights. In the Friday tomb scenario, we could maybe say 3 days if we considered a little bit of Friday evening a day and the sun rising on Sunday a day, but we can't get 3 nights. I don't care how you do this. There's just not 3 nights, right? So Jesus said 3 days and 3 nights. So how can we do that? How does that work? Another thing I would say, and this is something I didn't know when I first put this together, this is something I've looked at since that time, but I've looked at a bunch of a bunch of scholars' rendition of the last week of Jesus, what we call the Passion Week of Christ, okay? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Almost every one of the scholars and things I read doesn't say, Wednesday, they either say not recorded or nothing happened. Wednesday's dead. They can explain Monday, they can explain Tuesday, going back and forth to Bethany. You remember Jesus coming in and laying the palm branches down, Palm Sunday, right? That's Palm Sunday. We call that Palm Sunday. That would have been the first day of the week. We know that. That was that Sunday of the week he was crucified. So we know the Sunday of the week he was crucified, he came into Jerusalem on a donkey as prophesied by Zechariah. They laid the palm branches down, said, Hosanna in the highest. We know that, right? He taught in the temple. He went back to Bethany that night, which probably went to the home of Mary and Lazarus. He went back to Jerusalem the next day, taught in the temple, went back to the home. But see, that's as far as it goes, those 2 nights. So Wednesday, in almost every biblical scholarly account, Wednesday's unaccounted for, like Wednesday doesn't exist. Then Thursday, they start again, see, well, so there's a gap. So if we look at this a little bit further, my deal, I've lost me. There we go. So we look at this a little bit further. This is a little harder to understand. Because this deals with the year of Jubilee, and you have to understand the year of Jubilee to understand why this comes up. The year of Jubilee was a year that God proposed to the Israelites that said, basically in the year of Jubilee, all debts were forgiven. If you're in Judaism, and they never really did this. God told them to do it. They did it about once. They never really did it because nobody wants to give back stuff, right? And that's what the year of Jubilee was all about. It was about giving everything back. On the year of Jubilee, because land was allotted in Israel, right? When they took the promised land, every family got a piece of ground. I would have got a piece of ground. That would have been the Walter piece of ground, okay? God really wanted people to keep the ground that he gave them because he gave it to them, right? It wasn't theirs. They didn't buy it. Remember? He just gave them the ground. And he says, this is your ground. This is the Walter piece of ground. But guess what? Rex falls on hard times, right? Somebody in my family gets sick or something happens or my crops don't come in and I got to sell my land. So I go to Jack and I say, Jack, I need to sell my land. Jack says, I got money. I'll buy your land. Okay, good. So Jack buys my land. And then the year of Jubilee comes along, right? And in the year of Jubilee, Jack has to give my land back. Even though you bought it, you got to give it back because that's my land. You see, God gave me that land. You see what I'm saying? And God gave you your land in God's eyes because we're both Israelites. We're both, right? And if I loaned somebody money, I had to forgive it. You see? Because everything was like God's way to reset it, right? Does that make any sense? God said every 50 years, I'm going to reset. I'm just going to reset it. And everybody's going to get back, and nobody's going to buy him any money, and we're all going to start over again. Which, that seems like kind of a good thing in a way, but on the other hand, if you're the one that's got to give everything back, you probably ain't too ready to jump on that bandwagon. You know what I'm saying? So, but that's the year of Jubilee. It's a favorable year of the Lord. Now, they didn't hardly ever do it. Matter of fact, I don't know if they ever did it, but maybe did it once. But that's what the year of Jubilee was. So when we sing that song, this is the year of Jubilee, that's what it's talking about. It was a reset for Israel. Forgive the debts, give back the land. All these things that you were supposed to do, to reset things in God's eyes. But when we get to Canaan, where he'd been brought up, and as was his custom, he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read, and he read the prophet Isaiah, and he opened the book and found the place. The Spirit of the Lord was upon me because he anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery to the sight of the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to listen to what it says, to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord. That would be the year of Jubilee. He closed the book, gave it back to the attendant, sat down. The eyes of all the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. So if we trace that timeline back, the last year, the year of Jubilee, would have been 27 AD. Okay? So if the prophet Isaiah is right, and he's proclaiming a favorable year of the Lord, that's the year of Jubilee, That would have been 27 A.D. Now we know from the Gospel of John, which we've been studying, John has 3 Passovers, right? We've talked about that. There's the first, remember, he turns the water into wine in Canaan, right? And he goes to Passover, right? And then there's a Passover in the middle, right? And then at the end, we're back to Passover number 3, right? So there's a Passover every year, every spring of the year. Jesus turned the water into wine before his first Passover, okay? So Jesus' ministry would have been, we believe, about 3.5 years long, okay? So there's some controversy about that, but honestly, I don't see how it can be anything other than that. According to the Gospel of John, we got 3 Passovers, right? So that's pretty plain, 3 years. Turn the water into wine before the first Passover in Canaan, right? First miracle, Canaan of Galilee, turn the water into wine. 3.5 years. This is important. We're going to get to it in a minute. So let's say, so the year of Jubilee was there 50 years. So he says, if we go all the way back to where God instituted that, right all the way forward, which somebody's done that's a whole lot smarter than me, because that going from BC to AD business is really tough on Rex's brain, I'm telling you right now. But they run all that down, and that would have been 27 AD. So let's go with that. So Jesus began his ministry, let's say, in 27 AD. So now we get back. So keep that in your mind a little bit, okay? Because if he had a 3-year ministry, right, and 3.5 years basically, the first, he would have started the fall of 27 basically, because Passover's in the spring. So it would have been 28, right? He would have been crucified in 31. So that's important. After the Sabbath began dawn towards the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. Very early on the first day of the week, and really the one I want you to look at is that when they got here, right, this is the first day of the week. So we know this date. We know what this is. This is morning. There's no doubt about that. So very early on Sunday morning, they came to do what? They came to anoint the body of Jesus. They came to do that. But we also know from John, I don't know why I didn't put John up there, but we also know from John's gospel that it says she came before, while it was still dark. John says that Mary came to the tomb while it was still dark. On these, it says, it began to dawn. Now so in Catholicism, in the Catholic timeline, that's the argument. It says, Mark says, on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. But that's they, right? In John, it says Mary came to the tomb while it was still dark. So Mary came, according to John. It's here it says at early dawn they came to the tomb. But, so they say, well, it had to be after the sun rose. John says it was still dark. So John said the sun hadn't even come up. So if that's the case, we can't count Sunday as a day, right? So historically, this is what we think, or this is the Catholicism idea of it, is that Jesus either had to be crucified in 30 or 33 AD, since this is the years in which Passover falls on a Saturday. Okay? So Passover is like Christmas. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Anyway, it's like the same idea, right? Passover is a date, not a day, right? So every so many years, Christmas falls on a whatever. What's it on this year? Monday, right? Terrible day for Christmas, Monday. Terrible day. Yeah, Monday. Terrible day for Christmas. If I was president of the United States, I'd say, no, we're moving Christmas back till Saturday, right? But it's a date. So it always, every year falls on a different day of the week, so to speak, and eventually you rotate back to that same day of the week. Well, Passover's the same way. Passover's the 14th day of Kiev, so it's a date. So to make Jesus be crucified on Friday, he either had to be crucified in 30 or 33 AD, because those are the only years in that time frame that Passover actually fell on a Saturday. Passover actually fell there. The problem with 30 and 33 AD timeline is that it says Jesus was 30 years old when he began his ministry, right? And we know the calendar's wrong. We know that. Christ wasn't born in 0 AD because it wouldn't work. Because Herod the Great had all the male children killed from 2 years and under. Remember that? We're at Christmas time, right? Herod the Great had all the male children killed from 2 years and under. And we know Herod the Great died in 4 BC because there was a solar eclipse the year Herod died, and the only year next to that is 4 BC. So Herod died in 4 BC. So Jesus was born from 6 to 4 BC. So these dates in that respect are probably a little bit off. But anyway, this is the scenario. The body's in the tomb late Friday before sunset, Saturday, Sunday morning after sunrise. Every part of a day is considered a day, so that gives us 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's what we've heard our whole lives. But in 31 AD, now remember, go back to the year of Jubilee, right? It was 27, right? So 31 would fit into that, right? 31 would fit into our time frame. So 31 AD, Passover falls on a Wednesday, okay? Now, and I'm going to get into this in a minute. Passover is the Sabbath, so Passover falls on a Wednesday, which would have been April 25th. Isn't that neat? We can even tell the date, right? And I was born on the 26th of April, so I think it's kind of cool. Anyway, so April 25th. Then resurrected Saturday night, April 28th. That gives us Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, right? And Wednesday night, Thursday night, and Friday night, and nothing on Sunday. So that gives us 3 full days and 3 full nights, which is what Christ said, right? 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth, right? So does this work? Can this work? Well, I think so. In Leviticus, it says, for 6 days work may be done, but on the 7th day there is a Sabbath of complete rest, a holy convocation. You shall not do any work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwellings. These are the appointed times of the Lord, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at the times appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight, is the Lord's Passover. Then on the 15th day of the same month, there is a feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. Now listen to what it says in 5. In the first month, on the 14th day, that's the Passover we're talking about. That's 14th of Kiev, first day, first month of the Jewish calendar. It says, so on the 14th day at twilight, there's the Lord's Passover. And that starts at twilight when the sun sets. Then on the 15th day of the same month, there's a feast of unleavened bread. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. Exactly what it says for the Sabbath. No laborious work. But for 7 days you shall present an offering by fire to the Lord. On the 7th day is a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work. So the first day and the last day, Sabbath, or Passover, was a week, 7 days. And on the first day of Passover and the last day of Passover was a Sabbath, just like Saturday Sabbath. No work, okay? So just because every Saturday was a Sabbath, it doesn't mean that only Saturdays were Sabbaths, okay? Are you with me so far? You got confused looks on your faces, right? So what's a Sabbath? A Sabbath is a day of rest, right? God said on 6 days, on the 7th day, you shall do no work, right? You can't cook, you can't clean, you can't do any work on the 7th day. But the first and last day of Passover were also a Sabbath, and you couldn't work. And they were a holy convocation to the Lord. But they didn't necessarily fall on a Saturday, okay? So this comes back to what's a high Sabbath, because in the Scripture, it says in Numbers 28, on the 14th day of the first month shall be the Lord's Passover, and the 15th day shall be the feast. On the first day of the week shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no laborious work. On Mark 14, it says, the disciples went out and came to the city and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. So this would be first day of Passover. They're getting ready for that day, which would be a day of no work, which would be a Sabbath. The only question we have to ask is, what day was this? Now, according to the Bible, it says in John, it says, then the Jews, because it was day of preparation, so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day. It was a high day because it was Passover Sabbath, okay? Now, what I've always heard my whole life is that it was a high day because Passover Sabbath fell on regular Sabbath. But when I researched that, I found out that's not necessarily true. I heard that my whole life. But it was a high Sabbath because it was a Passover Sabbath, not because it was a Saturday Sabbath, because it was a different Sabbath than that. It was a high Sabbath. John distinguishes it from the regular Sabbath. You see what I'm saying? He doesn't say because it was a Sabbath. He says, John gives this little parenthetical statement that says, guess what? It was a high Sabbath, right? It was different. It wasn't the same as a regular one. So here we go. So let's change the timeline a little bit. So Wednesday, which I told you earlier, I researched that, and nobody seems to know what happened on Wednesday. I mean, it's just like Wednesday's a dead day, right? So let's just say Wednesday is a day, there's a night that he was crucified. Wednesday night. Now, I know this, you got to think about this a little bit, because I have to think about it a little bit. I'm going to try to say it slow so I don't confuse myself. So let's look at this for just a second with me. Okay, so if we go back to this, it says, so let's say Jesus was arrested on Wednesday. It says his disciples went in to prepare for Passover, right? I'm going to try to go really slow here because I'll confuse myself. So we know, according to what I just read from the Old Testament, Passover begins at what time of day? Twilight, when the sun sets, okay? This works. I'm trying to, I have to think about it a little bit, but this works. So they come in on Wednesday to prepare for the Sabbath. So that means the Sabbath would be on what day? We would say Thursday, right? They're preparing for it. So they prepare for it, and then remember how this all goes, right? So then that night, Jesus takes the Passover, right? After dark, Jesus takes the Passover. Which technically would be that next day, right? So that the high Sabbath would be Thursday, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That would be Thursday. So if Jesus' crucifixion would have been Wednesday, I'm going to go a little further away here, then he would have been, Passover Sabbath would have been Thursday, so that would have been a day of rest. And then you would have Friday, which would be a normal day, right? It would be a Passover day, but it would be a normal day. Then you would have Saturday, you would have another Sabbath, right? So you would have Thursday, Sabbath, you would have Friday, normal day, Saturday, Sabbath, right? One thing that always confused me in the Bible is it says that in Luke, it says they returned to prepare spice and perfumes, and on the Sabbath they rested according to the commandment. That never made any sense to me. Because if Jesus went into the tomb on Friday night, then that would have been Sabbath. Because I just said it starts at twilight, right? So Friday night when Jesus went to the tomb, that was Sabbath. You can't work. So how could they have went and prepared spices and then rested on the Sabbath and then showed up on the first day of the week? Because it would have already been Sabbath. It would have been that night of Sabbath. So you couldn't do that. You couldn't buy anything because you can't buy anything on the Sabbath. You can't prepare anything because you can't work on the Sabbath. But let's just say that this other timeline's right. let's just say that Sabbath was on Thursday. So they take Jesus down, right? They want him in the tomb before Sabbath, so they take him down Wednesday night, right? Put him in the tomb. Thursday, which would have been the first day of Passover, they don't do anything. Then Friday, they go and get the spice and perfumes, and they prepare them. Then Saturday, they rest according to the Sabbath. And then Sunday morning, they go to anoint the body. Does that make sense? You see what I'm saying? This never made any sense to me because I never could see how they could do that because they couldn't have done that. That's another thing in this other deal that doesn't make any sense to me. You know, there's no way you could do it. So it says on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb while it was still dark and saw the stone already taken away. If that's the case, then the Catholic timeline, that idea of Sunday morning being part of a day doesn't work because it was still dark. So technically, Sunday would not have been a day because the sun hadn't risen, according to John. You can't include Sunday as a day. So if that's the case, we got Jesus on the timeline we all have heard our whole lives. We got Jesus going into the tomb on Friday night, and then we got him coming, which gives us technically, we could say Friday day, Friday night, Saturday night, but if he comes out of the tomb before daybreak, then we don't have Sunday. Jesus said he'd be 3 days and 3 nights. So it really blows that apart a little bit. But it says when the Sabbath is over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome, brought spices so they might come and anoint him very early on the first day of the week. They came to the tomb when the sun had risen. So that would be after Saturday Sabbath. And then the tomb, like I said, it was already there. It was already gone. So let's go this way. And I'm gonna tell you what the fly in the ointment on this in a minute too. But because there always has to be a fly in the ointment, right? But let's just go this way. So Jesus' disciples ate the Passover meal on Tuesday evening, April 24th. One day early, or possibly today, depending on the reckoning of a day. This is probably the only fly, this is a problem with any timeline with the crucifixion of Christ. That's the Last Supper. The Last Supper, it's a problem, regardless of how you look at it, because we consider that to be a Passover meal, right? Matter of fact, it says they went to prepare the Passover, right? Isn't that what it says? Any way you look at it, that's problematic. Because if the Passover was on Saturday, right, he would have ate the meal according to traditional timeline. That meal, he would have ate that meal on Thursday night, right? And they would have took him Friday, would have been the day of trial. So it still wouldn't have been Passover. So there's a lot of speculation about that. Did he eat Passover a day early? Either way, that's probably another study for another day, but it's a little bit of an issue. Passover meal. Jesus' Last Supper becomes a bit of an issue. Was it technically on Passover or not? Was it technically a Passover meal? Did he take it a day early? I don't know. That's kind of another study. But after that meal, Jesus' disciples depart to go to Gethsemane. You know that story, right? They have what we call the Last Supper. They depart, they sing a hymn, they go to the Garden of Gethsemane. We know it's night, it's nighttime, right? So if we're going with this timeline, Jesus was betrayed and arrested early Tuesday evening. His lasted throughout Tuesday night and early Wednesday morning. Jesus was, so in other words, he would have went to the garden, that would have been Tuesday. Then Tuesday night, at some point, he was arrested. We don't know how late, how early. At some point Tuesday night, he was arrested. We know he went through a whole day of trials, right? He went before Caiaphas, he went before Annas, he went before Pilate, he went before Herod, he went back to Pilate. That took most of Wednesday. Jesus was crucified about 9 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, April 25th. Darkness fell at noon. About 3, he died, right? Took him down from the cross before dark because they didn't want the bodies left on the cross for Sabbath, right? For Passover. Jesus was buried on Wednesday about sunset. The two burials waited until after the high Sabbath, April 26th. They brought spices to prepare them on Friday the 27th, and after the Sabbath, Saturday, they went to the tomb on the first day of the week. The resurrection occurred on Saturday night, and the tomb was empty Sunday morning. So if we go with that timeline, then we have him in the tomb for 3 full days and 3 full nights, right? Instead of the other way, where we don't have him that long. That's a lot of stuff, isn't it? You know, we hear something one way our whole life, especially in religion and faith. You know, we hear something, we're raised one way our whole life, we hear that our whole life, it's beat into us our whole life, and those are the things we never question, right? The things we never question are the things we always hear one way. There's never a controversy, never a debate. We just hear it, that's how it is. We accept it. We see problems with it, but we accept it, and then at some point, hopefully, maybe we start to examine some of those things we've taken to be one way our entire life. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, if we go this way, if we go this way, that we put him in the tomb on Wednesday night, right? So we have Wednesday night, we have Thursday night, we have Friday night for sure, right? So we have 3 full days, because it says he came out before daylight on Sunday, right? So we have 3. We also have Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So we have 3 full nights. We have 3 full days. Isn't that what Jesus says? Just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so also the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth, right? So if we go this way, we get 3 full days, we get 3 full nights, everything works. It just makes more sense, you know? I mean, I'm not trying to say, well, I guess I am, but that, you know, 2,000 years of Catholicism was wrong when we talk about Easter, but I mean, that's where we get these holidays. I mean, I'm not, and you know, I was raised Catholic, you know, and I mean, but I mean, Catholicism really dominates in a lot of ways our religious landscape because it existed for so long. And you know, Easter, you know, Palm Sunday, Christmas, those are all Catholic holidays. I mean, they're not, we all understand that, right? I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't celebrate it. I'm not bashing it. I'm just trying to state the fact here, right? Christmas was Christ's Mass. I mean, it was Mass. I mean, and the reason it's on the 25th is because the 25th was a pagan celebration in those days. Why was it a pagan celebration? Because it's winter solstice, right? Winter solstice, what day is that this year? 21st? I don't know, I didn't look. Huh? Winter solstice is 21st. So that was the reason that was a pagan holiday, was because pagan holidays revolved around astronomy, and winter solstice, summer solstice were all pagan, big pagan holidays because they revolved around astronomy to a large extent. And that was a huge pagan holiday, was winter solstice. So the Catholic Church basically said, let's make it a religious holiday. It'll be a lot less rambunctious, and let's call it Christmas, Christ's Mass. But that's why it's December 25th, not because Jesus was born on the 25th. We know Jesus wasn't born in December. For sure, we know that. So we don't know when he was born. In the spring. Jesus was born in the spring. Pretty well tell you, but I can't tell you the date. But that's really influenced us religiously, and still does. And so when we talk about Palm Sunday, we talk about Good Friday, we talk about, those are all really Catholic. They're really Catholic. I mean, I guess I should say Catholic holidays, but they're holy days that the Catholic Church basically made holy days over the course of centuries. And then they become celebrated, and we took it to be, that's how it was. And then when you start to study it, you say, well, is that really right? Is that really wrong? But this is something I think we have wrong. And I just think this makes a lot more sense. And I think religiously we can back it up.
Doesn't it fall back onto exactly what they're classifying as the first day of the week?
Well, the first day of the week's first day of the week is always Sunday.
According to the Bible.
Yeah, according to the Bible, yes. Of course, see what we have to understand, they didn't have our calendar, right? We have the Julian calendar. They didn't have our calendar. Our calendar didn't come into existence until, what, 3-4 centuries after Christ, 3.5 centuries after Christ. And our calendar was set by a monk named Dionysius, and he's the one who set our zero. Okay? In other words, he's the one that said this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. He set the 0 date. Okay? But that date's wrong. Okay? Because we know Herod died in 4 BC. So Jesus was not born at our 0. Jesus was born 4 to 6 BC, according to our calendar, would have been when Jesus was actually born. We know that. That's wrong. The 0 date's not right. They didn't have our calendar, but it didn't change the days of the week. First day of the week is still Sunday. Seventh day of the week is Saturday, Sabbath. So calendars changed, but the days of the week are still the same. So their first day of the week is our first day of the week.
Wasn't their year classified as shorter?
Their year is the same, but they don't do leap year. So in other words, we have to have a leap year to adjust our calendar, right? Is this leap year? Next year's leap year, I think. Next year's leap year, I think. Anyway, that's why we have a leap year. That's why we have 1 year with 29 days in February, because our calendar is off enough in astronomy that if we don't have an extra day, our calendar won't be right. We have to have a leap year. So, but what they did in their calendar, boy, you all are getting stuff. I've studied this, but it's been a long, long time ago. But in their calendar, they basically did the same thing. Every so many years, they added days to make it stay straight. So basically, every calendar is based on the idea of a 24-hour day and a 365 and a quarter day year, right? Because isn't that our years are 365 and a fourth day long, right? That's why we had to put that other day. Because we do 365 days, 365 days, 365 days, 365 days, but there's a quarter day on the end of each one of those years. So every fourth year, you got to throw an extra day in February to shift it back into sync. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about a Mayan calendar or a Jewish calendar or a Julian calendar or any other, or Gregorian calendar or any other calendars we've had over the centuries. They're all based on the idea of 24-hour day, 365-day year. It doesn't matter. Mayan calendars, if you go down to the Mayan ruins, their calendars are based on the same idea, because that's how calendars are. They're days. It doesn't matter. A day's a day, right? It doesn't matter what calendar you have. A day's a day. The only difference we find in the Bible is in Judaism, their days went from sunset to sunset. That's what fasts were. In Judaism, there's only one fast in Judaism, Day of Atonement. That was the only required fast in Judaism. But you saw from what I just read you in here that Passover starts at twilight, right? And even Jews today, Passover starts when the sun sets on Friday night, and it ends when the sun sets on Saturday night. That's their day, okay? Because, I know we're out of time, but it's because they didn't have clocks and watches like we do. Midnight meant squat to them. It was just dark, right? I mean, a day is a day, right? To me and to you. I mean, I know our days are 24 hours, but even we really don't think about days so much that way, right? Our day starts when the sun comes up. That's what they knew. When the sun sets, that's the end of the day. When the sun sets, that's the end of the day. So their days went from sunset to sunset. So when you read in the Bible about a day, whether you're talking about Acts 27, first day of the week or whatever, it's Jewish days, sunset to sunset. Our days are midnight to midnight. But if you lived in that day and time, what would have midnight meant to you? It would have meant nothing to you, right? Because you don't have a watch, you don't have a clock, the sun's not up, you can't tell what time it is. Why would your day start at midnight? It'd be stupid, right? So they started their day at sunset. So that's the difference. And so when you look at this, that's what they use as that basis in the Catholic idea of that timeline, is that any part of a day is a day. So as long as he's in there before sunset, that's a whole day. If he comes out after sunrise, that's the whole day. But I think you can see, especially on Sunday, he was not in the tomb when the sun came up on Sunday morning. He was already gone. He was already resurrected when the sun came up on Sunday morning. So I really didn't intend for this to take the whole class period, so I hope I didn't bore you. But anyway, that timeline, this timeline to me, it just makes so much more sense, and it sets my mind at ease on a lot of the things over the years that have really bugged me about this crucifixion scenario and about Jesus being in that tomb 3 days and 3 nights, and especially about him preparing the spices and going back to do it. That never made sense to me. I just see how they could do that. So whenever I kind of got this proposed and started studying it, I'm like, yeah, this makes a whole lot more sense. And then Jennifer asked me to go through it again, so I did. And I know some of you all been through it with me a couple times, but I hope that you find it interesting, if nothing else, right? I guess at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, but I think it kind of does, because if the Bible's true, if what Jesus said is true, 3 days and 3 nights, then that should be true, right? Jesus spoke truth.
Their day starts at
Evening, when the sun sets.
just as it did in Genesis.
Yep, right.
Okay, and so it would end the next evening.
Yes, evening to evening, yep. I'm way over time. Thanks for your time.